Good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this NZLS CLE webinar, Taking Your Research Skills to the Next Level. My name is Philippa Blair and I'm today's moderator. We have two presenters today, Robin Anderson from the Law Library in Wellington and Julia de Vries from the Law Library in Christchurch. And the runtime for the webinar is 1 hour, and this will include time for questions at the end. And there'll be no break, but if you do need to pop out during the broadcast, you'll be able to catch up on the missed parts via the archived copy. And at the end of the webinar, I will tell you how to access the archive. And you have already received an email from us with a PDF copy of the booklet. And just a note that this booklet is only available as a PDF. And you've also received the PowerPoints that will be used today. And just a note that we have muted your microphone so that background noises don't interfere. And we do encourage you to participate in the webinar by sending in questions during the broadcast. And I'll now explain how to do this. And you can now see the webinar toolbar slide. If your control panel is a small box on the right-hand side of your screen with 3 icons going down, click on the orange arrow to expand your control panel to full size. And now that your control panel is expanded, you can use the orange button to show or hide that control panel as you wish. If you would like to permanently show the expanded control panel, you will see 3 menu options on the top right of your screen. Click on the View menu, and on the drop-down menu, make sure that the Auto Hide Control Panel option is unticked. And to ask questions during the webinar, you will need to enter your question into the area near the bottom of the control panel called Enter a Question for Staff. And the presenters will answer as many questions as time allows. And thank you to those who have already sent in questions. And thank you once again for joining us today. And I'll now pass you over to Julia.
Thank you, Philippa. Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to have had such a positive response to our legal research webinar. We set the scene for our webinar with this comment on the lawyer's duty to know the applicable law, and this is taken from the new 3rd edition of Duncan Webb's Professional Responsibility text. There have been numerous texts written on how to do legal research, and our webinar can't provide in-depth coverage, so what we hope to offer is a brief practical guide to effective research. This is based on our experience as legal researchers and also observing people doing their research in the Law Society libraries. You'll know that the 3 main legal publishers provide webinars and other forms of training on how to use particular products. So while we'll cover online searching, we don't want to duplicate what you can get from the publishers. Instead, our focus is to provide a more generic overview on how to approach legal research. You can see legal research as a 3-stage process. Firstly, identifying and analysing a problem, and secondly, identifying appropriate information to solve the problem. Thirdly, presenting the results of the analysis and research in an effective manner. And those first 2 stages of that process intersect, and we'll see that as we go through the seminar. Now, Robin's going to speak to you about creating a framework for your research.
Thank you. The standard framework that we like to encourage everybody to use when starting your legal research is the classic who, what, when, where, why and how. And I'm going to talk to you first about the who and the what. Who are you doing the research for? This influences your research quite a lot in terms of the focus, how you report the findings you get, the level of resources that you use, and the amount of time that you spend doing it. Who is also important for considering any other third parties, any other people involved in the research. Is the client going to read this? Is it going to a senior partner only? All of those sorts of things need to be borne in mind, and I recommend that you jot them down as part of your creating the framework for your research. The what question is the key question for this, And I'm just giving you a high-level overview of this SWOT question. You've got details in the booklet, and I recommend that you have a good read-through of all of that. What is important? Because you need to have a very clear understanding of the information you need. You need to know the context, that's important, the story, but also you need to be focusing on what you were searching for. What are the legal remedies that you want? What's the end result that you want out of this question? Depending on that will depend on your search strategy, the words you use, everything else like that. So you need focused questions. You need to go through your context, your flesh, your story, your legal soap opera that you're dealing with your client, and you need to get down to the legal bones of this. It's something you're familiar with in analysing a case, but in this case you're analysing the context and the question. So you go through that, see what sorts of end results you want, because as obvious, the sorts of end results that you want will determine where you look. If you want legislation, you may not necessarily go to a textbook for it. Although, if you're looking for Australian legislation, it may be faster to go to Halsbury's Laws of Australia than to start going your way through all of the legislation databases. So again, think about what you want, think about places to go, think about the search questions, the issues and everything, and then move on from that. Julia is now going to do the when, where, why and how questions.
Thanks, Robin. The next questions on your checklist or framework are the when questions. Now, it's fairly obvious, but time is probably one of the most significant factors and constraints. So you do need to ask yourself how much time you have available and match that against how much time your research is likely to take. And just to say, in-depth research always takes longer than you expect. So if you have the luxury of the time, that's going to be allow you to do the most effective research. Also consider what time span the information is. The time span of the information required. Is it current? Do you need to look at point-in-time legislation, historical, and so on? The next question in our framework are the where questions. So which jurisdiction, and also a key question, where to find the relevant information, tools and resources. We're going to go into this in more detail shortly, but we certainly suggest that you start with the library's databases page, and we have a reference to the link to that as a footnote on page 6. The why questions. What is the purpose of your research? You need to have the context and relevant background to understand the question correctly. And often for us as researchers, if we start with a question and we go back to the requesting lawyer and we get a little bit more context, it can make all the difference as to how we approach research, and you can certainly avoid wasting time and going down the wrong path with that context. We don't need the full story, or if it is a soap opera, as Robin said, but we certainly, obviously you need the material facts, but also a little bit of context around that is very helpful. So if you are researching for another lawyer, always check back for clarification. If your search results are starting to look as though you need to refocus your question, and if it's appropriate, provide interim results and then confirm what else is needed. The big question, how? How do you get there? Your research plan is how you do it. So you will have already begun to formulate your research questions, identify some relevant tools and resources. So you've worked through the checklist so far, so that's covering off 5 of the 6 honest serving men, or Kipling's honest serving men, which is a tried and true framework, which is why we suggest it to you. So why is a research plan important? Well, it does encourage a methodical approach to your research, and that's crucial. And you're also creating a record of your work in progress. So the key thing, update your plan at each step of the way. So this allows you to focus and refine your questions, and that's crucial, of course, because you're moving through an analysis. It allows you to track what remains to be searched, and this is especially useful if you get interrupted. Often you're going to be at a stage where you need to prioritise your time. So you've mapped it out, then you're going to have to say, okay, this and this is crucial. You're recording your key results, and you can use your research plan as a draft research report for whoever you're doing the research for, and even if it's for yourself, it's always going to go to a client. So it's a good way of keeping all of your information in one place. So your plan can be just jotted down if the research is fairly simple, but if possible, most research should be saved electronically and updated as you go. So we suggest either using just saving to a Word document and saving in folders. And for me, I actually work as an email to myself because there are lots of interruptions. It means I'm attaching the selected judgments and commentary as I go. Always making sure to name the files with citation and source references. And of course, always annotating the plan as you go, whether that's on a piece of paper beside you, in an email to yourself, or both. You will have realised by now that research is not a linear process. It doesn't run in a straight line, but it involves drilling down and mining different sources. The general rule of thumb is to start wide and narrow down, and that means usually starting with the commentary, so those secondary resources. And if you really are starting out cold on a topic, then start with a legal encyclopedia like Laws of New Zealand or Horsbury's Laws of England. Trace back. As you refine your research, you need to revisit previous sources and rerun your search on your new search terms. Review your results regularly because you want to follow those leads. Make sure you don't miss anything. And if you're really lucky, you'll find a vein of cases on your issue. And that's always a eureka moment. Remember, footnotes are just as important as the main text in legal commentary. Another more recent source of useful references can be found in secondary sources cited in case law. Some of the databases are introducing this now, and that's a similar sort of role like footnotes to the judgment. So keep an eye out if there is a secondary source available in the database you're using, and just to say that Links Plus has that information that's been included in the case record for a number of years now. So over to you, Robin.
Thank you, Julia. The image that you're seeing in front of you is on page 18 of your paper, and it's an overview of how to work through a research process, starting with the facts, going to the search strategy, looking at the tools that you have available, going back, have you found an answer, have you not found an answer? And this is a reminder that this is a process, that it's a circular process, and that it's an ongoing or iterative process. You need to think about, when you're starting this process, when you're starting creating your search strategy, you need to think about a few things and note them down. The area, or more than one area, of law that you're dealing with, the words and concepts that you think can be used for your search terms. Are there any relevant texts available? And that includes relevant texts and databases. If it's a book, is it an online book? That's also handy. Are there any other relevant tools that you might use to find it? And think in this case about things like digests, words and phrases legally defined, dictionaries. There's a lot of other tools to search and a lot of databases that you can search. On the page, on the screen now in front of you, you can see the New Zealand Law Society's databases homepage, which we've referred to on page 6. This is our list of resources available online in the library, organised by subject, by jurisdiction, and A to Z by title. It's a very good point a place to start if you just want to see what there is available that might be useful to you when you start to do your work. So look for that and use that. Now I'm going to talk to you about a few traps that you might find along the way. And the first big trap is currency. For everything that you look at, you must have in your mind a question: how current is this? How up to date is this? When was this written? Has it been updated? The fact that it may be online doesn't mean that it was written in March or April or May 2016. It may have been written 15 years ago and never updated. And if you are going to rely on it, you need to know that, because you will need to do the updating. Also, when you're looking for information, publishers can be slow sometimes to put the information out there. It took a little while for information on the Property Law Act 2007 to emerge. So things may not be there. When you've found your case law, you have to check how current that is. You've found a vein of cases for your issue. You've been really lucky. You found an older case and you followed it through and you found lots more current cases. Good. You need, when you're looking for these cases, to note the citation. Make sure you've got it exact. If it's a more recent case, it should also have a medium neutral citation, and then if it's reported, the reported citations will be parallel citations alongside it. You need to look at a number of things with this case. Is it authoritative? Has it been reported? That's always a good sign. Has it gone on appeal? That's always a bad sign, maybe. How has it been treated? Have all the judges thought it was wonderful, approved it? And has it been used in several different ways to support several different propositions? And you need to isolate which bit supports your proposition and to make sure it's used. So look very carefully at it. Now, the ways that you find out this information are by using case citators. And we've put down on the paper a number of different case citators that you can use. There are more roadblocks and traps, and Julia's now going to talk about some more of them.
Thanks, Robin. Yes, dealing with roadblocks. It's good when you finally learn to see them coming, so you don't spend too much time on fruitless searches. But there are times when you just can't find anything on point. So check, again, did you start wide and narrow down? And certainly if you can't find something, go to a legal encyclopedia or commentary first. Sometimes forgotten, but very, very useful when you've come up against a blank, are the words and phrases dictionaries. So Stroud's words and phrases judicially defined. These are great tools, and you'll find them usually in your library because they're pretty expensive and they are just in print. But they are very valuable and they're kept current. So hopefully you'll find something in a words and phrases dictionary that gives you a bit of a lead, and then if you do, don't forget, you then go off and do a cases cited search. Sometimes it means that you need to do a legislative history. If there's just nothing else, and you need to go back to the purpose of the Act. Could your answer be found in settled law, where the authorities predate most legal databases, and so we're talking probably the pre-1980s, and that's quite likely in certain questions that they have been settled for a long time, and then suddenly there's an interest. And one example would be, say, riparian rights, and now the interest for water and irrigation. You may find a lot of useful information in the early material for something like that. Or is it likely that you're dealing with a novel issue? And of course that will happen where there's a new legislative regime or some legal concept that's introduced from another jurisdiction. I can think of the example of C in Holland, Fotterjay's decision of 2012. That was about covert filming. And introduced the tort of intrusion upon seclusion into New Zealand law. And there was a very impressive amount of research done for that case. So it's those outer boundaries between settled law and novel law that you might strike problems. So dealing with interruptions, we all have this, it can be a roadblock, so that's just to emphasise again, save your work as you go, save often, and systematically update your research plan. When you get to something odd, the best thing, I think, is to consult. So talk to someone about it. Even just the talking, that process will help you formulate your questions and strategies. Talk to your supervising lawyer. And I think this is an important point to make to young lawyers. Don't feel that you can't go back and ask questions, because you need to have something clarified that's the person to go to. Of course, you can always ask your friendly law librarian. We're always happy to have a chat to you. And if you've got time, have a look at Mary Rose Russell's recent text on legal research in New Zealand, which we highly recommend. Now it's time for a collection of various tips from Robin.
Thank you, Julia. There's no silver bullet, unfortunately, in legal research. There's no guarantee that you are going to find the answer that you want. And what we're trying to do with all of this is to give you a framework to make sure that you've looked everywhere, that you haven't forgotten anything, and you can feel much more confident saying when you say, I found the answer or I haven't found the answer. But here's a few tips for when you are starting to do things. Remember, if you're searching overseas jurisdictions, start with an encyclopedia if you can. It's a really good way to get a top-level down overview, and there are encyclopedias for a lot of countries. We've got the laws of New Zealand, Halsbury's Laws of Australia, Halsbury's Laws of Canada, Halsbury's Laws of England. That's a lot of the Commonwealth and a lot of the areas that we're interested in for the jurisdictions that are covered. When you're looking for a specific judgment, you've got a couple of choices. You can use a citation field. If you've got a medium neutral citation for the judgment, in other words, it's a more recent one where that's been assigned, great, pop that in and you'll see where it is. If you've got a reported citation for it, also use that. And keep an eye out for these all the time. Remember to label a case if you save one with these things so that you've got the information to hand straight away. Because the citation is the judgment's unique identifier, and that's what you need to have. If you're searching for a case via the case name field, that's very useful and a good way to do it. Don't put the V in, use and. So CRAL and the Earthquake Commission. This is a very handy way of also checking to see if the case has gone on appeal, or if you have the appeal case, getting the lower level cases so that you can follow the chain of cases through and make sure that what you're looking for is what you've got. Don't rely on one single source. As much as possible, double check the information with another title, another source, another subject, because that just gives you added information, and as Julia will say later on, when you find the same things coming up all the time, it's an indication that you may be near the end. And a final suggestion for you when you're doing through all of this, think about whether you're likely to incur any more costs. You may need to discuss that with your client. The costs can be small, they can be large, but if you've got photocopying, document delivery, something like that, do you need to have the budget arranged ahead of time? Julie is now going to give us an introduction to online searching.
Well, it's a very brief comment, really, but we're up to page 11 on the webinar paper. We've headed this precision against Google. We really don't have anything against Google, but what we're talking about here is precision searching. So it's how you enter the terms. So you've got your search terms. This is different. This is about getting the most precise search out of the database. So databases have a search and browse function. Our main focus here is the search function because it's the most effective in most cases anyway. So your search string, so those are the concepts that you have, they have to be carefully constructed to achieve the best possible results. You will often have to use a proximity search operator combined with some of the other techniques which we'll outline shortly to find relevant hits. So it's not a matter of just putting in a search term as you can in a Google search box. But before you start typing in your search terms, just sit back for a minute and make sure you know what the default search for the particular database that you're about to use. So this is how the search engine will interpret what you are going to enter in as your legal concepts or issues or the terms that you've come to. Does the database default to a phrase search? Does it use and or? And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But effectively, if you type in water rights, does it search water rights as a phrase? Is it looking for water and rights together throughout the whole document, which may be hundreds of pages? Or is it looking for water or rights? And databases have a default search. And whatever that default search is will depend on what you need to do to make the computer search the way you want it to. So you have to understand, for instance, LexisNexis, a very well-used platform. The search actually defaults to a phrase search. Westlaw defaults to an or search. A phrase search is actually quite unforgiving. It's very literal. And in fact, most of the time, you actually do need to use something to tell LexisNexis to do something other than a phrase search. So you have to, will mention that to find out where the database's default search is, it should be in the publisher's help screen or the terms and connectors. But we can tell you the main database is LexisNexis defaults to a phrase search, beware. And Westlaw New Zealand defaults to an or, which is more common. So before you start typing anything, just think, am I searching a full text database, or is it an index or a citator? Am I searching records and a head note or the full text of a decision? So for something like Links Plus, you're not searching the judgment, you're searching what a head noter has written in a head note to summarise the judgment. So it does, that will reflect how you need to search. So it's very important to just step back and think, what am I searching? The terms and connectors that you will need to use are referred to on a table on page 12. So you need to use at least some of those techniques to construct a legal database search. The following operators can be combined to add power and flexibility to your search. So Robin's going to talk about search terms, search operators, So I'll hand over to you, Robin, to talk about Boolean operators.
Thank you, Julia. Boolean operators or search operators are the first things that I'm going to be talking about, and Boolean operators are part of that. If you look on page 6, you'll see our illustration of how they work. It's just below the diagram showing you what the main databases recommended are, and that of course is from the book we are recommending you look at, Mary Rose Russell's Legal Research in New Zealand. So the information on that book is all there on page 12. Connectors, also called Boolean connectors, are the most important ones that you will use. Everything else is important as well, nothing is unimportant, but these are the basis. These are the ones that are the same across all databases, which is good, and we're illustrating them here because it's important that you know the distinction between and, or, and not. People don't always quite get it the first time they look at it, and it's very important. And actually narrows a search down because both of the words that you were looking for must be in the end result, or enlarges it to everything. So if you think of your phrase water rights, if you want water and rights in the answer, it's a lot smaller than if you want water or rights, which will be a huge question. Not is a very powerful search operator, and it excludes the word from the search. It's something that you can use perhaps in a database which is carefully curated, head notes. I would not recommend it ever in a full text database or a database of judgments, because the moment the judge says this is not about lessees but about something else, you could have excluded your key judgment. So be very careful of it. I would use a not search maybe once a month, once every 2 months at the most. It's just too powerful to be used normally. I'm now going to go on and talk about synonyms, because it's important that you think about these when you're doing your research. When you start research, you can quite often focus quite narrowly on your end result. You want cases because a grandmother wants to help her grandchild, so you put in grandmother. Do you only want grandmothers helping their grandchild, or do you actually want any grandparent, maybe also uncles, aunties, what have you? You've got to be careful to think about it. Don't focus on the word the client's used or the word you've used in your note, but think about how carefully you want it. You may need to use more than one word, aviation or aircraft, instead of drone when you're looking for something. You may need to use vessel or boat or yacht, because cases involving any of those will be useful to your end results. And you may also, if you're looking overseas, need to be very careful to find out what words they use, because it's not always the same. Julie's going to continue talking about the next few items in the research field.
Thanks, Robin. We're up to page 13 on the webinar paper, and there's some notes there about nesting or bracketing. And if you're looking at this when you're doing your research, you're nearly an expert, because you'll be combining at least two connectors. And what the brackets do is they tell the database the order of your search terms. So I'll let you look at the details of that. Probably when you're using it will be the most useful time. Truncation is, I'm sure, very familiar to most of you, or if not all of you, but don't forget to use it to truncate your searching. In the current databases in New Zealand, they're finally using the same operator for a truncation symbol, which is the exclamation mark. Up until now, there's been a mix of asterisks and exclamation, but it makes life simpler for people if we're all using the same symbols. Phrase searching we've talked a little bit about in relation to default searches, but most databases require you to use quote marks if you want to search for an exact phrase. And that's the key thing. You have to be sure that that's all you want. It's a very literal search, that you are telling the database, I only want duty of care in my search results. If you have a term where and is actually part of the phrase that you want, it's safer in a database to enter your phrase with quotes. So, for instance, Young Persons and Their Families Act, because it's got the and in there, the computer would actually interpret that as an operator. So just be aware of that. So phrase searching creates a very narrow literal search, and it has to be used with care. And unless you're really sure that you want an exact phrase, it's much better to use a proximity operator. And most of the time that's what I would do, at least. Well, I'm going to talk to you about what they are, but it's safer, and you're not losing anything by using a proximity or limiting yourself with using a proximity operator, but you are if you enter your search as a phrase. So proximity searching is probably the most important operator that you should be aware of if you're searching full text databases. So what that means is it tells the computer to search for your words or terms within a certain proximity or distance to each other. And you can say whether you want that as ordered or unordered. The common options are W/P for within the same paragraph, or W/S in the same sentence. You can see how useful that would be. Or you can say the number of words or terms that you want your search terms, the result to be those terms within, say, 10 words of each other, or up to 150 words, I think you can do. So it's a very powerful operator, searching a full text database, and we say in our paper, in fact, it's essential for precise full text searching. If you want to know about ordered and unordered, have a look at the paper there. And now I'm going to hand over to Robin to talk about advanced search options.
Thank you, Julia. This is just a short coverage of a few advanced search options, and the first one I'm going to talk about is fields. A lot of the data that you've got has been structured by the publishers and by others, and there's a lot of information that some of it you see, some of it you don't actually see very often, and these are called fields in the technical terms. You can often get access to them through an advanced search template or an advanced search page, and we've got an example here of an advanced search template from the Links database produced by the Law Societies. And as you can see going through it, it gives you quite a few ideas for information that you may not have thought of, or ways of finding information that you didn't know how to do. And it just makes it easier because you can plug these words in, you can put things in. You can find, for example, by filling in this template here, you could get all cases from the High Court, Dunedin, in 1996 that were decided by Justice Young that contained the word damages in the head note. Could be very handy if you're sitting there thinking, I know there was a decision, it was a few years ago, I was involved in it. That's another thing you can do, look yourself up and see what cases you're involved in have been reported. There's all sorts of fun things you can do when you have time with this. It's a powerful tool. It's a good way to help you structure your thoughts. It's a good way of reminding you about more places that you can actually get information and more types of information that you can get when you're doing your research. Another option, which is recent or has recently come to our database systems, is called faceted searching. It's called that by librarians anyway. And it comes in when you've got a set of search results. Usually they're ones where you've started broadly and you're at the stage of narrowing down. And faceted searching is a nice, simple way of narrowing them down, because on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a number of options that you can limit or narrow your searches by. They frequently are things such as jurisdiction. If you're searching in Australia, you may then be able to narrow by Commonwealth or one of the states. There are also things by court level. You may be able to say, you'll be able to click only Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, High Court decisions. You may also be able to narrow by things such as subject, conveyancing, or you may be able to narrow by source, and you're looking there, you've got 1,500 search results, and you think, I'll look at the New Zealand law reports only. It's a very good way of narrowing everything down. Browsing is a little bit similar to this, but with browsing, you start with the whole database, and you drill down in a list of subject headings or in a table of contents. You can choose, for law reports, it's usually by year and by volume, similar for journals, and for commentary, quite handily, it is effectively a detailed table of contents where you can go down more into more and more detail until you find the paragraphs that you want. Julie is now going to talk about classification and subject headings.
So a lot of what librarians do is organise information, and for a long time we've been using subject headings to do that. Databases are doing pretty much the same thing really, except they may call it taxonomy or a subject tree, or classification is being used by some of the New Zealand databases. But really what it is subject headings, and this is to overcome the problem of natural language and we do that by using what we call controlled vocabulary. And that's what subject headings are. So for the publishers, they use metadata tagging behind the scenes, and it really does give very powerful added value to database searching. So think about using controlled vocabulary, because it is very effective, and a lot of work has gone on with the content to match it to the particular subject heading or classification. So all of this work's been done for you. Westlaw, the new platform, while there's been a few problems, one of the great development work they've done is their classification system. So you've got a hierarchy of terms, and you can see, especially for the case law, what you're looking at, where in that taxonomy your case is, and then you can click on that and see all other cases that have been tagged with that particular subject heading. So most legal databases will have some form of thesaurus operating, and it's very useful, so keep an eye out for it.
I'm now going to talk about display of results. It's something that I feel very strongly about. Yes, I am a professional librarian. And it's very important when you get results to think about the display of results. How has the database presented this information to you? This is important because until you know how the database has presented the information to you, you don't know what use you can make of it. What is the order the results have come out in? And there's a whole variety of orders that they can come out in. They can come out in last in, first out, or in other words, most recent first or oldest first. And again, knowing that is important to knowing how far you need to go through the results, what you're looking for. Sometimes it can be alphabetically by source. For case law, it can also be hierarchically, so that you get all of the Supreme Court judgments first, then the Court of Appeal, then the District Court, then the High Court, then the District Court. Also, you can get it rated by weighted or relevance. And remember, it's the computer that's deciding the weighting and the relevance, not you. Frequently, this is done by the number of times the word appears. This can be useful if it's in a full text database, but you need to be careful about it because, again, it is not necessarily the most important judgment. It is the computer's thought on the most important judgment, and that's done by somebody telling it to count the number of times refrigerator appears because you've put in refrigerator. In the internet, this can also be gamed by people putting in information. So if you're doing a Google search, you have to be very careful about things like this. They can really game you and tip you up. So it's important. That said, I also want to talk about a few traps. Plurals is one of them. You need to think about if it's done automatically or not. If it's done automatically, you don't have a problem. Publishers have used different symbols for different things. And again, go back to the diagram on page 12 from our recommended research text and have a look through that for the databases that you're using and be aware. If you're using a database not mentioned there, you need to know that information for that database. You also need to know what the database's default question is, because if you don't know, this is right at the beginning, and I'm just warning you again, we've talked about it a lot, it's something we think is important. Know the default. You have to be aware that sometimes the database doesn't do everything that you would expect it to do. Sometimes not all of the commentary that they provide has been linked to all of the sections of the statutes that are mentioned there. Most of the time that's true, but don't necessarily rely on it. Inquire, make sure, have a look at everything that's gone through, go back to your subject headings and say, oh, hang on, I didn't see results from that. You may need to go and do a search in that database or that subject or that textbook separately. You also need to be aware, particularly if you're getting odd results, perhaps you're doing a section search on a case, you may need to check and see how that's presented. They'll usually tell you if you're doing a field search like the links fields that we showed you, but it is worth asking because sometimes you've put in the wrong thing. Same as terms and connectors. If you're getting odd results, think to yourself, am I using the right connector or right symbol for the right database? This is all very important. Now, we're nearly at the end of this, and Julia is going to run through finalising your research for you.
Okay, so we are reviewing and finalising our research. So this flow chart on the screen recaps what we've covered in the seminar. And we've started off with material facts, legal concepts. We've had our search strategy and the tools. Some of those, you'll notice they're not just online databases. We've got all sorts of tools with added value which are worth remembering. And hopefully you've got to the yes on the right-hand side there at the end, and you can go home or back to work. But just before you do that, just make sure you've asked yourself, have you found the current applicable law for your issues? When to stop. And I think Robin mentioned this, but it is always a good clue. If the same results are turning up in different searches, it's usually safe to assume that you've covered the field. Make sure it's a checklist, so you need to go through it. Make sure you haven't missed a vital step. So, and review your research plan against the results, because things will have moved and shifted and taken twists and turns along the way. What you've picked up at the beginning, is it still relevant now that you're at the end of your research? And just for emphasis, do you need to update your information? Have you done the cases cited on your key cases? And this is actually a very important step to do at the end. Make sure that you have actually made sure that you've done a cases cited check, just so you haven't missed that current authority or other cases on point. And always make sure that you've noted the bibliographic details. So we're talking title, author and page number and edition for any commentary. And of course your case details and citations. And don't forget, we've got the New Zealand Law Style Guide, which sets out the citation format for New Zealand. That's published by the New Zealand Law Foundation and is available online. But just a final word is, remember, it's not all online. So always ask yourself, do I need to search the library catalogue and check hard copy resources? Now, over to Robin.
I'm going to present to you another option, which may be because you've just read through this research seminar and thought, oh my goodness, I can't do all of that. Or even, oh my goodness, I don't have time to do all of that. You've got the New Zealand Law Society Library and its legal research services. We are here to help you as an intermediary between your question and the sources of law and the information. And we help in the middle stage of this by getting information to you that you will need to analyse to answer for your problem. And we can help you all the way through this, or we can, in some cases, do it for you. So think of us as another option. Your law librarians are, in fact, your research mentors, and we are here for that, and we are available for that. We are your law librarians from your law library. Thank you.
And thank you. So now we have some time for some questions, and we've had them flowing in thick and fast. So we'll just get down to them, and we'll ask the first one here, how do I know that I've found the right or full answer?
When the judge says you have, basically.
It is when you've done exhaustive research.
Yeah.
We said there's no silver bullet, and hopefully the answer will answer the issue that you're looking at. So, sorry, looking at another question there. The right or full answer.
Yeah.
You usually do know by looking at the content and matching it against your question.
But the answer is you'll never have the full answer, because you can never look through everything, and everything is never available. And there is always a new case coming out, or the government's about to pass legislation or something else. So you've got to be always aware that there may be something else.
Okay. I'll just cover a couple of very quick ones here. Is Stroud's Words and Phrases available online?
Not that we're aware of, unfortunately. No. It's an ideal book to be online, and I would dearly love it if the legal publishers are sitting up there in their rooms waiting. Yes, it is. Although the next question would be, could we ever afford it if it were online? And I don't know the answer to that either.
Well, it is extremely expensive in paper.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, I think you will find it's just in reference collections and libraries.
Yeah. Okay. And we've been asked to repeat the recommended text on the legal research. I'll just say here, it's referred to under the table on page 12. Now, the next question is, how comprehensive are the case citators referred to at the top of page 9 of your booklet? Can they generally be relied on?
They can generally be relied on, but they are the works of people, so they're not perfect. They can also generally be relied on, but not everything is always everywhere in the databases. So if it's very old, maybe it won't be in there. If it's very new, it may not be in there. Every publisher and every compiler is doing their utter best to make them as comprehensive as possible. Certainly, most of them are comprehensive for reported cases, but for unreported cases, less so.
And just remember the cases cited field in most databases.
Yeah.
I mean, really, you've got to use more than one source.
Yep.
But we would not say that they're comprehensive.
No.
Okay. Now, our next question here is there an ability to access databases that the library has remotely? In other words, can I access them from my desktop in my office? And if I can, what databases are available?
There is currently only one database that is available that you can access from your desktop, and it's called Aegis Plus Text. It's a very good database. We've mentioned it in Library News and in Canterbury Tales and Council Brief, and it is one that you can find from the database pages, and you have to go through your Law Society login to get access to it. All the other databases, unfortunately, the publishers charge us enough just to offer them in the libraries, and I really don't want to think how much they would like to get out of us if we gave them to everybody. So it's a nice thought.
Okay, just to say that we have a footnote on page 8 which says, due to publishers' licensing restrictions, subscription databases can only be accessed in the library. But of course we've got that free legal resources page which you can access any of the links on that page. But yes, publishing licensing or publishers' licensing restrictions are very strict.
Okay. Now the next question here is, I do all my research through LexisNexis. Can you explain more how the NZLS database works, and is there an access charge?
Right. It's not the NZLS database as such as a list of all the databases that the NZLS library has in it. And no, there's no access charge. It's freely on the web, and it's telling you what we have in the library. If you're accessing it from your desktop, any of the LexisNexis databases that you subscribe to, you can access this way, but you can't access the ones that you don't pay for, unless you are inside the Law Society library, when you can access all of them inside the libraries.
Okay, thank you. And we've still got them, they're still coming in. The next one here is, in the advanced search option, does the word or phrase search only search head notes?
No. It actually searches a special field inside the database called Words and Phrases Legally Defined, or something of it. And it's a field that has been created by the database publisher, going through the judgment concerned and seeing, oh, there's a nice long treatment of this word from the judge. Excellent. I'll make sure everybody knows about it and can find it by putting it in this field so it can be searched for specifically. So It's extra data. It's not from the head note itself. It's from the judgment.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is, what is classification?
Well, it's part of the taxonomy and the controlled vocabulary and subject headings. So it's classifying legal topics. In libraries, we use classification for what we call call numbers. So we classify the particular topic content together in one place. And what databases are now doing is something similar, except they skip the classification number bit and they're putting it under a hierarchically arranged set of what I call controlled vocabulary, which are subject headings basically, and they're hierarchically arranged, and that's how law is arranged. You're going from the area of law, just like going through an index. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thanks. And the next one is, what does space mean on page 12, the page 12 table, for example, under West law?
Yeah, that mystified me when I looked at it, and I thought, as far as I can tell, it means that you use that symbol and then you put a space after it using the space bar on your keyboard. And it will only work if you put a space there. And if you don't put a space in, it will treat it as part of the following word. I suspect that all of them probably need to have space after them, but it just hasn't been put there.
And our next one, how do you research finding a particular document and any cases where that particular document has not been followed?
You would have to use a citator for that.
Yeah. But in fact, with great difficulty is the real answer, because most legal research is set up to enable you to follow where work has been followed, not where something has not been followed.
Robin, but you would see a red signal with the case name in the citator, which is, a traffic light symbol to say, warning, there's been negative treatment of this case.
Yes, you can look for the negative treatment. You can look for the not followed treatment, and that's your best way of finding the information, but it's a little bit less simple than other things.
Okay. I think we'll make this our last question. Sometimes research has to be done urgently and with little notice. For example, the senior is in court and suddenly requests urgent research on a point that has arisen in the trial, and they need it by lunchtime. How can you deal effectively with situations such as this?
We do it quite a bit, I think. Hopefully, effectively as you can in the time provided, and that really comes down to experience and not panicking. But it's difficult if you don't know where to start. But really, to do it effectively, you have to have reasonably in-depth knowledge of how to do research, depending on what it is, of course. But I would say if you need to, and it's really important, then contact a law librarian and ask for help.
And ways to contact law librarians. On the webpage for the New Zealand Law Society, you'll see Contact the Library, and that gives you details on the libraries. We've got phone numbers, we've got email. If you want stuff urgently, it's best to ring up one of the 3 libraries and ask them if they can do the research urgently for you. The cost of doing this is we charge by quarter hour, and it's $40 plus GST per quarter hour to do legal research. And often we will do legal research within quarter of an hour, half an hour. We certainly will do it as much as we can within the amount that you are allowed to spend, because you've of course set your budget earlier on, so you know the limits for that.
That's great. Thank you so much, and thank you, Robin and Julia. It's been really, really interesting. I've learned so much during the process of getting to this point. Now, just a bit of more housekeeping for you all. Have you watched this webinar as a group? And a reminder to those of you who have watched it this way, to please complete the attendee sheet and email it to us at cpd@lawyerseducation.co.nz. And that attendee sheet was attached to the same email as your booklet. And accessing the archive, you can access the archive copy by logging on to MyCPD on the NZLCLE website, and further instructions on how to do that will be emailed to you shortly. And the same email will also give you an electronic certificate of your attendance for your CPD records, and a link to an online evaluation. And we'd really appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to complete that evaluation to let us know what you thought of today's webinar. And I'd like to thank Robin and Julia again so much, and I hope that you have enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you. The webinar has now concluded.